You know, when you hear ethics in tech, your mind probably jumps to these huge philosophical debates, right? But what if I told you the most critical ethical choices aren't being made in some boardroom, but in a code editor, line by line? That's what we're digging into today. We're reframing ethics not as some optional add-on, but as a core part of an engineer's job. This is all about what happens when those small technical decisions quietly become massive moral ones.
Yeah, we hear this all the time. A tool is just a tool. It's a nice idea, right? It's comforting. But honestly, it's a dangerous myth. Because the second you decide to build a system, you are embedding choices, your choices, into its very DNA. And those choices have very real consequences out in the world. I mean, think about it. Every single API queue, every customer service chatbot, every load balancer, it makes a decision. Someone gets served right now, and someone else gets put on hold. That's not neutral, is it? Nope. That is a choice about whose time matters more. Or look at a social media algorithm. It decides which voice gets the microphone and which one gets lost in the noise. A ride-sharing app decides which pickup is more important. See, prioritization isn't just sorting ones and zeros. It is a value judgment being executed millions of times a second.
What about a facial recognition system that just doesn't work well for people with darker skin? Or a simple web form that won't accept a name with a hyphen? These systems, by the way they are built, can literally make people invisible. So you have to ask, is that just a technical bug or is it a deep ethical failure?
When a self-driving car has to make a split-second decision or a predictive policing model flags a certain neighborhood, an automated choice is made that transfers risk from the system itself onto a human being. The bottom line is, none of these are neutral outcomes. They are the direct and frankly inevitable results of how the system was designed.
So how are we going to tackle this? Well, here's our game plan. First, we're going to completely tear down that myth of neutrality. Then we'll get into why ethics is a systems problem, not just about one person's choices. We'll look at how our values literally get written into our code, which can lead to some really bad unintended consequences. And finally, we'll talk about what it actually means to design for responsibility and face that one last question every single builder has to ask. Okay, so if we agree technology isn't neutral, then the next question is, whose fault is it? Where does that responsibility really lie? Now, it's really tempting to just blame a few bad apples, but that's a trap. It's missing the forest for the trees. To really get this, we have to think much, much bigger. We have to look at ethics on a systems level.
And this slide right here shows that shift in thinking perfectly. On the left, you've got the old way of looking at it, ethics as a simple checklist. You know, don't break the law, fill out your compliance paperwork, be a good person. But look over on the right, the systems view. Man, that forces you to look at something much bigger. The massive, combined consequences of your design choices on millions of people who never even knew they were part of the experiment.
And this is exactly why that systems view is so critical. Because the very thing that makes a tech product a huge success, its scalability, is the same thing that can turn one tiny little flaw into a full-blown catastrophe. A small, almost invisible bias in an algorithm, when you scale it up to millions of users, can cause enormous systemic damage.
All right, so if these systems can cause so much harm at scale, how do these ethical blind spots even get in there? Well, the answer might surprise you. It turns out that every single technical choice we make, from the database schema to the API contract, is also, without us even realizing it, a moral choice.
I guarantee you, any system you've ever worked on has an answer for every single one of these questions, whether you meant for it to or not. The default settings you chose, the metrics you decided to chase, the way you handle errors and edge cases, all that builds a framework of values. The system you build ends up being a living document of what you and your team decided was important. Let's make this really tangible. A load balancer isn't just shuffling traffic around. Its algorithm is literally encoding an assumption about what's fair. A ranking algorithm isn't just sorting stuff. It's making a statement about what society should pay attention to. And your service level agreements, your SLAs, they're an explicit statement about whose experience is a top priority. And automation itself, it encodes a really deep value, how much you fundamentally trust a human versus a machine. So we've established that values are baked right into our systems. But here's the really tough part. Most of the harm caused by technology isn't because of some evil genius in a dark room. It's emergent. It grows out of choices that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time, and more often than not, from the things we just didn't think about. So how does that happen? How does good intent go so wrong? Well, it usually happens in a few ways you see over and over again. We chase a single metric, like engagement, so hard that we accidentally build a machine that rewards outrage. We automate a manual job to be more efficient, but in the process, we take away a person's ability to appeal a bad decision. We cut costs, and in doing so, we just shift the risk of failure onto our users. And maybe the worst one, we let the things that are easy to measure replace the complex, human judgment that actually matters.
So, here's the key takeaway. There is often a massive gap between what we intended and what the system actually does. We might have meant for it to be fair, but what we actually told it to do, through our code, our data, our configurations, that created something else entirely. And this is where the danger really multiplies. When a system's logic is basically a black box, when you can't see why it made a decision and there's no way to appeal it, you've created this incredibly powerful structure, but with absolutely no one to hold accountable for how that power gets used.
Okay, we've laid out the problems: emergent harm, invisible power, the gap between intent and impact. So, what do we do? How do we even start to fix this? Well, the answer can't be an afterthought. It has to be a proactive approach. We have to design for responsibility. This is all about engineering systems where accountability, transparency, and safety are baked in from day one. This means we have to completely change how we think. Shipping the code isn't the finish line, it's the starting gun. Real ownership means you are constantly monitoring your system's impact in the real world, you are actively looking for emergent harm, you have the humility to admit your initial assumptions were wrong, and, this is a big one, you provide clear ways for people to get help when your system inevitably messes up.
So what does a responsible system actually look like in the real world? It follows principles kind of like these. Number 1, it's explainable. You can actually articulate why it made a certain decision. 2, it lets a human step in and override it, because no algorithm should be king. 3, it fails safely, meaning it protects the user above all else. 4, it preserves dignity, treating people with respect even when things go wrong. And 5, it prefers decisions that can be undone, because some mistakes are permanent.
Now, everything we've talked about so far just gets turned up to 11 when we start talking about AI and autonomous systems. The speed, the scale, and the sheer lack of transparency in these technologies, they just amplify every single ethical challenge we've just covered. Look, automation doesn't get rid of responsibility. It just spreads it around and makes it harder to pin down. And that forces us to ask some really tough questions. When an AI causes harm, who's on the hook? The person who trained it? The company who deployed it? And who has the power to just pull the plug? As always, you have to ask, who is getting rich from this, and whose life is being made worse by its failures? And that brings us to what might be the ultimate truth in engineering today. As our power to build incredible things grows, the most important skill is no longer just technical skill, it's judgment. It's having the ethical maturity to question the requirements, to refuse to cut corners on safety, and sometimes to make the incredibly hard call that a particular system just shouldn't be built at all.
Let's just put all the pieces together, because it's like a chain reaction. The systems we build create incentives that shape how people behave. That behavior, when you add it all up across millions of people, defines the course of their lives, their opportunities, their setbacks, their reality. And those lives, all together, become the very fabric of our society.
So we'll leave you with this final thought. For anyone out there who designs or builds or manages these complex systems, the technical question of, can we build it, is usually the easy part. The real work, the profound responsibility, is in asking the much harder questions. Should we build this? And if the answer is yes, how do we build it in a way that is humane, that is accountable, and that is just? That is the challenge, and that is the true heart of modern engineering.